When a caring American couple hired what seemed to be the perfect tutor for their daughter struggling with learning difficulties, they believed they'd finally found someone to bring stability and confidence to their child's life. The tutor's credentials were flawless, her demeanor professional and compassionate. But one day, as the mother returned home earlier than expected, she stumbled upon a disturbing scene that left her heart pounding. What happened next would shatter the family's sense of safety and leave an innocent child with scars that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. Before we dive into this chilling story that will make you think twice about who you trust with your loved ones, comment below where you're watching from. And if you find this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The morning was unusually still as Sarah Thompson sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She had spent hours searching for options to help her 8-year-old daughter, Emily, who had been struggling in school. Though generally bright and eager to learn, Emily seemed to fall further behind her classmates each week, especially when it came to reading and writing. Sarah's heart ached each time she heard her daughter express frustration over not understanding her schoolwork. Emily's teachers had mentioned that she often seemed distracted in class, unable to focus or retain information. Sarah knew her daughter's spirit well. Her laugh could light up the entire house, and her curiosity was boundless. But school was becoming a source of anxiety rather than joy. Michael, her husband, had been supportive, though work often kept him late, making it hard for him to fully engage in the search for a solution. That responsibility had fallen largely on Sarah's shoulders. After days of reading online reviews, consulting friends, and scouring parenting forums, Sarah came across the profile of a tutor named Rebecca Harris. The profile stood out among dozens. Rebecca's credentials were remarkable: a master's degree in child psychology, a decade of experience working with children with learning disabilities, and a seemingly genuine passion for empowering students. Her profile was full of positive testimonials from parents who praised her understanding nature and her ability to help even the most anxious children find their footing academically. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Michael reviewed the profile with her that evening. He trusted Sarah's judgment, but her excitement drew him in. Together, they decided to contact Rebecca, hoping she might be the answer they were searching for. When Rebecca arrived at the Thompson home for the initial interview, she immediately made an impression. She was strikingly composed, dressed in a neat dark blazer and carrying a well-worn leather briefcase that hinted at years of experience. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her face was adorned with a warm but professional smile. She exuded confidence, yet her eyes held a gentle warmth that reassured Sarah and Michael as they invited her inside. The Thompsons led Rebecca into their cozy living room, where the sunlight filtered softly through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. Sitting down, Rebecca folded her hands neatly in her lap, exuding calm. Sarah could feel the nervous tension in the room start to dissolve as Rebecca began to speak. "Thank you for inviting me into your home," Rebecca began, her voice smooth and soothing. "I've worked with many children like Emily, and I understand how overwhelming this journey can feel. My approach is about creating a safe space for her, a place where she feels empowered to try, make mistakes, and ultimately find confidence in her own abilities." Rebecca's words hit Sarah like a balm. The tutor continued, explaining her methods with the confidence of someone who had repeated this speech countless times, but still managed to make it sound sincere. She spoke about understanding the unique learning styles of each child, tailoring lessons to help them feel capable rather than overwhelmed. She emphasized patience, resilience, and building trust. Michael leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "It sounds like you have a very thoughtful approach, but I have to ask, have you had experiences where things didn't work as planned? With all your expertise, I'm sure you've seen your fair share of challenges." Rebecca met Michael's gaze, her expression serious. "Absolutely. There are always challenges. But I believe that every child, no matter how difficult the situation might seem, has the potential to succeed with the right support. I've worked with children who were too anxious to even hold a pencil and watched them become top performers in their classes. It's about connecting with them, showing them they are valued. Her answer satisfied Michael, and Sarah could feel her own doubts melting away. Rebecca's calm authority seemed to fill the room, and the confidence in her voice made it seem like there was no issue she couldn't handle. They spoke a while longer, and by the end of the meeting, the Thompsons felt that hiring Rebecca was not only the right choice, but a necessity. Emily deserved someone who could see past her struggles and help her thrive. That evening, Sarah tucked Emily into bed with a lighter heart. She ran her fingers gently through her daughter's hair, listening to the soft rhythm of Emily's breathing as she drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow, Rebecca would start working with her, and Sarah dared to hope that this might be the beginning of a brighter future for Emily. The first tutoring session was scheduled for the following afternoon. Sarah prepared the study room, arranging Emily's books, pencils, and favorite markers neatly on the desk, wanting everything to be perfect. She noticed Emily fidgeting with her hair, clearly nervous, so Sarah knelt beside her daughter and gave her a reassuring hug. "Rebecca's really nice, Em," she whispered. "I think you'll like her." When Rebecca arrived, she greeted Emily with a warm smile and a gentle voice, coaxing her out of her shell. Emily, who was usually shy around new people, slowly opened up, responding with shy smiles and nods. Rebecca brought a collection of colorful learning materials, including flashcards, a workbook filled with puzzles, and even a few small rewards for each task completed. Sarah observed from the doorway, her heart swelling with hope as she watched her daughter engage, seemingly comfortable in Rebecca's presence. As the session came to an end, Rebecca closed her notebook and gave Emily a small, colorful sticker, which made her beam with pride. She turned to Sarah, her voice soft but confident. "Emily is a wonderful student. I can see she has potential. With time and patience, I'm confident she'll make significant progress." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. She thanked Rebecca, watching as she packed her belongings and left. Sarah felt a warmth toward Rebecca, who seemed to be the embodiment of everything they'd hoped for in a tutor. Little did they know, the arrival of Rebecca in their lives was about to alter the fabric of their family in ways they could never have anticipated. The weeks passed quietly, and on the surface, everything seemed to be going well. Emily's initial nervousness had subsided, and she appeared to be adjusting to the tutoring sessions with Rebecca. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Rebecca would arrive precisely at 4 o'clock, her punctuality unwavering. She would bring along her leather-bound notebook and an assortment of study tools, from colorful flashcards to small puzzles, each tailored to make learning engaging and fun. Yet, Sarah started to notice subtle changes in Emily's behavior. Normally a bubbly, outspoken child, Emily seemed quieter lately, especially on tutoring days. After Rebecca's sessions, Emily would often retreat to her room, her usual playfulness dampened. When Sarah asked about her day, Emily's responses were short and lacking her typical enthusiasm. She shrugged off questions about the sessions, offering only vague reassurances that everything was okay. Sarah's maternal instincts began to whisper that something was amiss. She tried to brush it off, convincing herself that it was just Emily adjusting to a new routine. After all, Rebecca was clearly dedicated and thorough. During their post-session chats, Rebecca would provide detailed updates on Emily's progress, describing small victories like solving a difficult math problem or reading an extra page in her workbook. Rebecca's confidence and apparent care eased some of Sarah's concerns. However, the change in Emily's demeanor nagged at her, like a tiny splinter that refused to be ignored. Then Sarah noticed a peculiar pattern. Rebecca had started making offhand comments, little remarks that seemed innocent at first but grew more unsettling with repetition. After one particular session, Rebecca remarked, "Emily is such a sensitive child. She gets a bit emotional when she doesn't understand something right away. Sarah had brushed it off as a simple observation, but as the weeks went by, Rebecca's comments became subtly critical, hinting that Emily was too fragile or overly emotional. Sarah found herself wondering if these remarks were affecting her daughter's self-esteem. One evening, as Sarah was tucking Emily into bed, she noticed her daughter's reluctance. Emily clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her gaze avoiding Sarah's. "Emily, is everything okay? You seem a little different lately," Sarah asked gently, stroking Emily's hair. Emily hesitated, her small fingers tracing the bear's soft ear. "I'm okay, Mom. Just tired, I guess." Sarah's heart ached at her daughter's subdued tone. She wanted to press further, but feared overwhelming her. Instead, she kissed Emily's forehead and whispered, "If anything is bothering you, you can always tell me, all right? No matter what." Emily nodded, her eyes flickering with a brief spark of trust, but she said nothing more. The following week, Sarah decided to observe one of Rebecca's tutoring sessions discreetly. She lingered in the hallway, listening through the slightly ajar door to catch glimpses of the lesson. She noticed Rebecca's voice was unusually stern, lacking the warmth she often displayed when speaking to Sarah and Michael. At one point, she heard Rebecca say, "Emily, you need to focus. You can't just give up every time something feels hard." Her tone, though not outright harsh, carried a distinct impatience. Sarah's stomach tightened. The words weren't necessarily wrong, but there was an edge to Rebecca's voice that felt out of place. She wondered if this was just a glimpse of the discipline Rebecca had mentioned during the interview, a necessary firmness to encourage progress. However, the expression on Emily's face as she left the room, a mix of relief and anxiety, left Sarah feeling more unsettled than ever. Later that night, Sarah shared her concerns with Michael. He listened, his brow furrowing as she described the subtle shifts in Emily's behavior and the unsettling tone she had observed in Rebecca. "Maybe she's just strict," Michael suggested. "Emily's not used to someone pushing her, you know? We hired Rebecca to help her improve, and sometimes improvement requires a bit of discomfort." Sarah nodded, understanding his point, but the unease lingered. "It's not just that. It's the way Emily seems anxious. I don't want her to feel afraid of learning." Michael sighed, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Look, let's give it a bit more time. Rebecca has the experience, and Emily has shown progress, right? Let's not jump to conclusions just yet." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, though her instincts refused to settle. She decided to keep a closer watch, hoping that her growing doubts were merely an overprotective reaction. But deep down, a quiet voice continued to murmur that something was off, a feeling she could neither explain nor ignore. Days turned into weeks, and though Sarah tried to brush aside her concerns, they seemed to grow, lurking in her mind like shadows. She knew she might be overthinking, as Michael often reminded her. He trusted Rebecca's qualifications and experience, and, as he repeatedly pointed out, Emily's academic performance had improved. Her grades were climbing, and her teachers had noticed a more consistent focus in class. Yet Sarah couldn't ignore the anxious look that seemed to linger in Emily's eyes after each session. One afternoon, after Rebecca had packed her things and left, Sarah decided to confront her doubts head-on. She prepared a snack for Emily and sat her down at the kitchen table, a soft smile on her face to keep the mood light. "So, sweetie," Sarah began, setting a plate of sliced apples and peanut butter in front of her daughter, "how are things going with Miss Rebecca? Do you like working with her?" Emily hesitated, looking down at her snack. "It's okay, Mom," she mumbled, her tone barely above a whisper. "Just okay?" Sarah pressed, keeping her voice gentle. "You know, if there's anything bothering you, you can always tell me." Emily nodded slowly but didn't offer any more details. Sarah waited, hoping Emily might open up, but her daughter simply picked at her food in silence. After a few moments, Sarah decided not to push further. She didn't want Emily to feel pressured or scrutinized. She just wanted her to feel safe. That evening, Sarah shared her worries with Michael again, trying to articulate the unease that had taken root inside her. "I don't know, Michael. I feel like I'm missing something. Emily is doing better in school, sure, but she seems so withdrawn. I don't want her to feel uncomfortable or pressured." Michael sighed, a familiar look of patient understanding in his eyes. "I get it, Sarah. But remember, change isn't always easy. Emily might just be adjusting. And look at the results. Her grades are better, and she's starting to catch up in class. Rebecca is getting the job done. Let's give her a little more time." Sarah nodded reluctantly, though her doubts remained. It was true. Rebecca's methods seemed effective, and there was no concrete evidence of harm. Maybe, she told herself, she was overreacting. After all, parenting was full of difficult decisions, and maybe this was simply one of those times when she needed to trust the process. In an effort to ease her own concerns, Sarah decided to invite Rebecca over for a coffee one afternoon, hoping to get to know her better outside of the formal tutoring setting. Perhaps, she reasoned, if she understood Rebecca's perspective more deeply, her worries might finally be put to rest. Rebecca arrived that day looking as polished and professional as ever. She accepted Sarah's invitation with a warm smile and sat gracefully at the kitchen table, her movements calm and controlled. Sarah poured them both a cup of coffee, and they settled into a comfortable conversation about education, Emily's progress, and the challenges Rebecca faced in her career. Rebecca shared a few stories about students she had helped in the past, each tale framed in a way that highlighted her patience and dedication. Sarah found herself reassured, if only temporarily, by the tutor's apparent passion for her work. Rebecca spoke of children who had been labeled as difficult or unteachable, but who had, with her guidance, learned to excel. Her stories painted her as a savior of sorts, someone capable of transforming struggling students into academic achievers. Yet, as the conversation went on, Sarah noticed a strange undertone in Rebecca's words. There was a subtle, almost dismissive way she spoke about the children she worked with, referring to their difficulties as limitations and describing their improvements as successes of discipline. Sarah felt a pang of discomfort but quickly brushed it aside, attributing it to her own overactive imagination. "Emily has so much potential," Rebecca remarked, taking a delicate sip of her coffee. "She just needs to learn resilience. Sometimes she gives up too easily when things get hard, and that's a habit we need to break." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar conflict bubbling up inside her. While she appreciated Rebecca's focus on discipline and improvement, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off in her approach. After Rebecca left, Sarah sat at the table, lost in thought. She wanted to believe that she was doing the right thing by giving Rebecca a chance, especially with Michael's encouragement. But a gnawing doubt lingered, an intuition that refused to be silenced. The following day, as she watched Emily shuffle her way into the study room for her tutoring session, Sarah felt a wave of protective instinct wash over her. She resolved to stay within earshot, listening closely. Though she promised herself she wouldn't interfere, she would observe silently, hoping to catch any sign that her worries were unfounded. But as the session unfolded, her concerns only deepened. Through the door, she heard Rebecca's voice, calm yet oddly authoritarian, as she guided Emily through her lessons. The words were gentle, but the tone carried an undercurrent of strictness, a quiet insistence that allowed little room for Emily's natural curiosity or creativity. At one point, Rebecca asked Emily to solve a math problem. When Emily hesitated, Rebecca's voice sharpened. "You need to focus, Emily. This isn't something you can just skip because it's hard." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Though Rebecca's words weren't explicitly harsh, there was a rigidity in her tone that made Sarah's heart sink. She wondered if this was the sort of discipline that had earned Rebecca her reputation, effective perhaps, but also unyielding. That night, Sarah lay awake in bed, wrestling with her thoughts. She wanted to trust Rebecca, To believe that this was all part of a process meant to help Emily grow stronger and more resilient. But her maternal instinct screamed otherwise, warning her of something she couldn't quite name. It was as if a subtle wall had been built between her and her daughter, a barrier of doubt and distrust that grew thicker with each passing day. She turned to Michael, who was half asleep beside her, and whispered, "What if I'm wrong, Michael? What if this is hurting Emily more than it's helping?" Michael sighed, barely opening his eyes. "Sarah, you're a good mother. You'd know if something was really wrong, but sometimes we have to let go a little to let them grow." Sarah lay back, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with possibilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play, something she didn't fully understand. But for now, with no proof and no clear path forward, she would have to wait, hoping that her worst fears would remain unproven. As the sessions continued, Sarah noticed that Emily had begun to withdraw even more, her usual lively demeanor replaced by a tense quietness that seemed to linger, especially on tutoring days. Emily, once an open book, now seemed closed off, retreating to her room as soon as each lesson ended. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. It was as if a part of her daughter's light had dimmed. One evening, while putting away laundry, Sarah found herself stopping outside Emily's room. Through the slightly open door, she could see her daughter sitting by her desk, hugging her knees to her chest, her gaze distant. The sight tugged painfully at Sarah's heart. She gently knocked on the door before stepping inside. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, moving closer to sit beside Emily. "Is everything okay? You know you can tell me if something's bothering you, right?" Emily nodded, but her face remained guarded. "It's nothing, Mom. I'm just tired." "Are you sure?" Sarah pressed gently, her voice laced with concern. "Sometimes when things get hard, it helps to talk about them, you know, just to get it off your chest." For a moment, Sarah saw something flicker in Emily's eyes, a brief flash of emotion that quickly disappeared as her daughter's gaze dropped to the floor. "Miss Rebecca she gets mad sometimes. She says I need to do better." Sarah felt her heart tighten, her worst fears inching closer to reality. "Mad? What do you mean? Has she said anything mean to you?" Emily shook her head, her small shoulders slumping. "Not exactly. She just Sometimes she makes me feel like I'm not good enough." Her voice was so quiet, Sarah had to strain to hear her. Like, if I don't get it right, I'm not trying hard enough. Sarah wrapped her arms around Emily, pulling her close. She fought the urge to storm down to Rebecca's next tutoring session and confront her on the spot. Instead, she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself for Emily's sake. "You are more than good enough, Emily," she whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "And no one, not even Miss Rebecca, has the right to make you feel otherwise. You're doing your best, and that's what matters." Emily looked up, her eyes shining with a glimmer of relief. She hugged her mother tightly as if she'd been carrying a heavy weight and had finally found someone to share it with. After that conversation, Sarah became even more vigilant, watching Rebecca's every move and listening intently during each tutoring session. She started making excuses to be around, offering drinks or snacks to Emily during the lessons, trying to be as discreet as possible while gathering more insight into Rebecca's methods. It became evident that Rebecca maintained a strict, almost rigid structure in her teaching style, which seemed to leave little room for Emily's natural creativity or curiosity. The final straw came one Thursday afternoon. Sarah was in the kitchen, tidying up after preparing lunch, when she heard a sharp tone from Rebecca echoing down the hall. She froze, her heart racing as she moved closer, careful not to make a sound. "Emily, we've been through this already." Rebecca's voice was curt and unyielding. "You need to remember these steps. If you don't put in the effort, you'll never improve. Do you want to stay behind everyone else forever?" Sarah felt a surge of anger rise within her. It wasn't just the words. It was the cold, almost disdainful tone in Rebecca's voice that made Sarah's skin crawl. She could sense Emily's anxiety through the silence that followed, and it was all Sarah could do to resist barging into the room. When the session finally ended, Sarah confronted Rebecca before she could leave. She took a deep breath, attempting to keep her voice calm and steady. "Rebecca, I'd like to have a word with you about Emily's progress," Sarah began, her tone polite but firm. Rebecca raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Of course, Sarah. Is there something specific you'd like to discuss?" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm concerned about the pressure Emily seems to be under. She's become more withdrawn lately, and I feel like the sessions might be a bit too intense for her." Rebecca's expression shifted, a brief flash of annoyance crossing her face before she composed herself. "Sarah, I understand your concern, but children sometimes need a bit of firmness to reach their potential. My methods may seem strict, but they're effective. Emily's performance has improved, hasn't it?" "Yes," Sarah admitted, her voice tight with frustration. "But her happiness is just as important as her grades, if not more so. She's only 8, Rebecca. I don't want her feeling like she's not good enough." Rebecca's gaze turned cold, her polite smile slipping. "In my experience, Sarah, children like Emily need discipline and structure. If you're uncomfortable with my approach, perhaps you should reconsider what kind of progress you want for her." The words stung, and Sarah felt her anger flare. She took a step back, realizing that she no longer felt safe leaving her daughter in Rebecca's care. "Thank you for your input, Rebecca, but I think we'll handle Emily's progress on our own from now on." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but she merely nodded, gathering her belongings without a word. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken tension as she left, and Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her once the door finally closed behind Rebecca. Sarah found Emily sitting in her room, hugging her favorite stuffed animal. She knelt beside her daughter, wrapping her arms around her protectively. "You won't have to see Miss Rebecca anymore, Em," she murmured, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "I'm so proud of you, and I want you to be happy. That's what matters most." Emily's eyes filled with tears of relief, and she buried her face in her mother's shoulder, holding her tightly. Sarah's heart ached with a mixture of sadness and relief, knowing that she had made the right choice, yet wishing she had trusted her instincts sooner. The days following Rebecca's departure from the Thompson household brought a palpable sense of relief to Sarah and especially to Emily. Slowly, Emily began to revert to her old self. The little girl who once lit up the room with her laughter was returning, and Sarah cherished each moment, grateful to see her daughter's spirit revive. The dark clouds that Rebecca had brought into their lives seemed to have dissipated, but Sarah couldn't completely rid herself of a lingering unease. It was a nagging feeling, like a faint itch at the back of her mind that refused to disappear. Rebecca had seemed too invested, too possessive of Emily's progress, as she called it. Sarah had even started double-checking the locks every night, a new habit born out of caution, if not paranoia. She brushed it off as an overreaction. Surely, she thought, Rebecca was just an overzealous tutor who had taken her job too seriously. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, the doorbell rang. Sarah, assuming it was her neighbor bringing back a baking dish she'd borrowed, opened the door without a second thought. But standing on her doorstep, perfectly composed with her familiar calm smile, was Rebecca. Dressed as professionally as always, in a beige blazer and slacks, she looked every bit the professional tutor she once claimed to be. The shock of seeing her made Sarah's stomach drop. "Rebecca," Sarah said, her voice strained with the shock and immediate tension that Rebecca's presence brought back. "What are you doing here? I thought I made myself clear." Rebecca's calm gaze met Sarah's. "Sarah, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You and I both want what's best for Emily. I believe you acted out of emotion, but I can assure you, my methods were helping her." Her voice was smooth, practiced, almost clinical in its calm. Sarah's heart raced. She clenched her hands tightly, forcing herself to stay composed. "Rebecca, I've already told you, Emily doesn't need your help anymore. She's doing fine without you. Rebecca's smile didn't waver, but her eyes held a hardness that made Sarah uneasy. Sarah, I know what's best for her. Emily needs structure, discipline, and someone who won't coddle her when things get difficult. I've been doing this work for over a decade. You, as a mother, may not see it clearly. Sarah felt a flicker of anger flare up, a mix of protectiveness and indignation. Rebecca, with all due respect, you don't know Emily the way I do. I'm her mother, and my first priority is her happiness, not some rigid discipline you think she needs. And honestly, the way you treated her made her feel anxious and withdrawn. Rebecca's gaze sharpened, and for a split second something dark flickered across her face. Sarah, you're making a mistake. Emily needs someone who can help her reach her potential, someone who isn't afraid to push her past her limits. Sarah stood her ground, her voice firm. My decision is final, Rebecca. Emily doesn't need you, and frankly, I don't want you anywhere near her. Rebecca's lips curved into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. One day, Sarah, you'll regret this decision. You'll realize that letting her go was a mistake. But by then, it may be too late to undo the damage. The threat in her words was unmistakable. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. Leave now. If you come near my family again, I will have no choice but to call the police. Rebecca held Sarah's gaze for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Finally, without another word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the driveway. Sarah watched her leave, heart pounding, her hands shaking as she locked the door. She leaned against it, taking deep breaths to steady herself, her mind reeling from the confrontation. As the evening wore on, Sarah tried to push the encounter out of her mind. She poured herself a cup of tea, hoping to calm her nerves, but the memory of Rebecca's cold, unblinking stare haunted her. It was as if a dark presence had passed through her home, leaving an invisible stain. She hoped that would be the end of it. But the following day, things took a darker turn. While picking Emily up from school, Sarah noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance gate. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, a remnant of the fear that still clung to her after Rebecca's visit. But as she walked closer, her heart skipped a beat. It was Rebecca, standing by the fence, watching the students with an eerie calm. Emily spotted her first, her face paling as she clutched Sarah's hand. "Mom, it's Miss Rebecca," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Sarah felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. She wrapped her arm protectively around Emily, guiding her away quickly without looking back. Rebecca didn't approach them, but the fact that she was there at all sent a clear, unsettling message. When they got home, Sarah's first call was to the police. She explained the situation, detailing Rebecca's persistent and increasingly invasive behavior. The officer on the other end took her concerns seriously, reassuring her that they would investigate Rebecca's actions and keep a close watch on her movements near the school. For the next few days, Sarah's anxiety only grew. She became hyper-aware of her surroundings, checking her rearview mirror every time she drove, and keeping an eye out for any sign of Rebecca. She double-checked the locks each night, a sense of dread creeping over her as she wondered how far Rebecca might go. Then one quiet evening, as Sarah was cleaning up after dinner, the phone rang. She picked it up, assuming it was Michael calling to say he was on his way home. But the voice on the other end made her blood run cold. "Sarah?" Rebecca's voice was calm, almost serene, but there was a steely edge to it. Involving the police was a mistake. Some things are better handled privately. Sarah's hand tightened around the phone, her pulse racing. "Rebecca, I told you to stay away from my family. I'm serious. If you contact us again, there will be consequences." Rebecca's laugh was soft, unsettling in its calmness. "Oh, Sarah, you don't understand. Emily is special. She needs someone who can help her in ways you can't. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. You're the one who doesn't understand," Sarah snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "If you come near us again, I will do whatever it takes to protect my daughter." A pause stretched on the other end of the line, thick with tension. Finally, Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. "We'll see about that, Sarah. We'll see." The line went dead, and Sarah stood there, the phone still clutched in her hand, her heart pounding as the words echoed in her mind. Rebecca's quiet threat hung heavily in the silence, filling the room with a cold dread. After the call, Sarah decided that enough was enough. She reached out to a friend who knew a lawyer and arranged for a restraining order, taking every possible measure to protect her family. Emily's school was alerted and precautions were put in place to ensure that Rebecca couldn't get close to her. Sarah also began to gather evidence of Rebecca's persistent behavior, keeping records of every encounter and interaction. Despite the measures, the fear lingered, an invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders. Every shadow, every unfamiliar car, every unknown number that called made her heart race, and she found herself constantly on edge. As the days passed, Sarah's resolve grew stronger. Rebecca's threat was chilling, but she was determined to protect her family. She made a promise to herself. Whatever it took, she would keep her daughter safe. But deep down, Sarah knew that this confrontation with Rebecca had only just begun, and that the fight for her family's peace was far from over. The days following Rebecca's last call were a test of Sarah's strength and resilience. Every time the phone rang or a shadow moved outside her window, her heart raced, her body on high alert. Emily's innocence and her once carefree laughter were Sarah's primary motivation, driving her to do everything possible to ensure her daughter's safety. Sarah's first step was to secure the restraining order. She met with a lawyer the day after Rebecca's chilling phone call, explaining every detail of her interactions with the tutor, every unsettling look, every veiled threat. The lawyer, a steady presence amid Sarah's turmoil, reassured her that she was taking the right steps. "Once the restraining order is issued, she won't be allowed within 100 feet of your home, Emily's school, or any other place you both frequent," the lawyer said firmly. "If she breaches it, the consequences will be severe." But Rebecca's behavior continued to push Sarah's resolve to its limits. Despite the legal measures in place, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca was lurking in the background, waiting for an opportunity. Several times that week, Sarah saw glimpses of what she thought was Rebecca's car parked on the street near their home or the school, always there but never close enough to be certain. Finally, one Wednesday afternoon, Sarah's worst fears materialized. Emily had just been dismissed from school, and Sarah was waiting in her usual spot near the gate when she noticed a familiar figure standing a few yards away, partially obscured by a tree. It was Rebecca. She wasn't attempting to hide, her gaze fixed intently on Emily. Sarah's pulse quickened as she pulled her daughter close, her grip protective and firm. "Come on, sweetie, let's go," she murmured to Emily, who immediately sensed her mother's tension. But as Sarah turned to leave, Rebecca began walking toward them, her expression serene, a faint, unnerving smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Panic flared inside Sarah, but she didn't hesitate. With one arm around Emily, she grabbed her phone with the other and dialed the police. "Hello, yes? This is Sarah Thompson. I have a restraining order against a woman named Rebecca Harris. She's here, right now, near my daughter's school," Sarah said, her voice trembling with urgency. The dispatcher's calm voice assured her that officers would be on their way immediately. As she hung up, Rebecca was only a few feet away, her expression unyielding. She ignored the restraining order, her presence an open defiance, as if daring Sarah to act. "Sarah," Rebecca said, her voice low, "this is all unnecessary. You're overreacting. I only wanted to check on Emily." Sarah held her ground, her voice steady despite her fear. "Stay away from us, Rebecca. You've crossed every line, and this stops now. The police are on their way." Rebecca's face flickered with something dark, her composure momentarily slipping as her eyes narrowed. "Sarah, you're making a mistake. Emily needs me. You're the one causing her harm by pushing me away." Before she could say more, The wail of sirens echoed down the street. Rebecca's expression shifted, a hint of frustration replacing her calm mask. She took a step back, her gaze lingering on Emily with an unsettling intensity before she turned and began walking briskly toward her car. Two police officers arrived moments later, stepping out of their vehicle and immediately approaching Sarah. She quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out as she gestured in the direction where Rebecca had disappeared. One of the officers nodded, reassuring her. "We'll track her down, ma'am. She's in clear violation of the restraining order and we'll make sure this behavior stops," he said firmly. They took Sarah's statement, ensuring she felt heard and protected. But even as she recounted the events, a chill lingered within her. She realized that this wasn't just about Rebecca's violation of legal boundaries. There was a deeper, more unnerving fixation that Rebecca held toward Emily. Later that evening, once they returned home, Sarah sat Emily down on the couch. She gently stroked her daughter's hair, her gaze filled with love and reassurance. Emily, sensing the tension and worry in her mother, looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom?" Emily began softly. "Why does Miss Rebecca keep following us? Did I do something wrong?" Sarah's heart ached, her chest tightening at the sight of her daughter's confusion and fear. "Oh, no, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling Emily close. "You did nothing wrong. Miss Rebecca, she just doesn't understand that she's no longer your tutor. Sometimes people don't know when to stop." Emily nodded slowly, her small fingers gripping Sarah's hand tightly. "I just want her to leave us alone, Mom. I don't want her to come back." Sarah held her close, whispering softly, "I promise, Em, I'll make sure she never comes near us again." The next day, Sarah received a call from the police. Rebecca had been located and brought in for questioning. She'd been found near a school just a few miles from Emily's, lingering in a way that raised suspicion. Upon further investigation, the officers discovered that this wasn't the first time Rebecca had crossed professional boundaries. There were other families who'd experienced similar disturbances, though none as severe as what Sarah had endured. The officer's tone was apologetic yet hopeful. "With your statement and the others we've gathered, we have enough grounds to charge her with harassment and violating the restraining order. This should ensure she won't come near you or your daughter again." Relief washed over Sarah as she thanked the officer, feeling the weight on her shoulders lift ever so slightly. She knew it would take time to shake off the fear and tension that Rebecca had brought into their lives, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope that the nightmare was finally ending. In the days that followed, Sarah and Emily focused on rebuilding their lives bit by bit. Sarah ensured Emily's school was aware of the situation, and the staff took additional precautions to keep her safe. Emily resumed her activities with her usual enthusiasm, her laughter filling their home once again. Sarah, too, felt a newfound strength. She'd stood up against someone who threatened her family, and despite the emotional scars, she knew they would heal. One evening, as Sarah tucked Emily into bed, her daughter looked up at her with a sleepy smile. "Mom," she murmured, her eyes drooping with exhaustion, "thank you for keeping me safe." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes as she brushed a lock of hair from Emily's forehead. "Always, sweetheart. Always." As Sarah left her daughter's room and turned off the lights, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over her. The ordeal had tested her in ways she'd never imagined, but she'd emerged stronger, more resilient, and deeply aware of her capacity to protect what mattered most. And finally, the house felt safe again. The weeks that followed Rebecca's arrest were a slow return to normalcy for the Thompson family. Sarah took time to rebuild the feeling of safety in their home, replacing each anxious glance over her shoulder with a sense of peace and comfort. She invested more time in Emily's happiness, encouraging her to embrace activities that brought out her natural curiosity and joy. The restraining order against Rebecca remained in place, and Sarah maintained close contact with the school to ensure that every precaution was taken for Emily's safety. Over time, her nervousness subsided, replaced by a quiet confidence. She had faced her worst fears head-on and had protected her daughter in the face of a true threat. One sunny Saturday morning, Sarah and Emily went to the park to celebrate. They brought a picnic blanket, sandwiches, and a frisbee, eager to enjoy the freedom of the outdoors without any lurking shadows. The park was filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing, the warmth of the sun casting a hopeful glow over the scene. Sarah watched as Emily ran through the grass, her laughter ringing out, unburdened and free. She had come back to herself, her spirit untouched by the darkness that had momentarily clouded their lives. As Sarah watched her daughter play, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She knew that challenges would come and go, but this experience had taught her something vital. She would always have the strength to protect Emily, no matter the circumstances. The bond between them was unbreakable, a source of courage and resilience. Emily ran back, breathless, her eyes shining with happiness. "Mom, are we really safe now?" she asked, her voice tinged with both innocence and hope. Sarah knelt beside her, holding her daughter's small hands in her own. "Yes, sweetie," she replied, her voice filled with certainty. "We're safe now, and I promise you, I'll always keep us safe." As they sat together on the picnic blanket, Sarah felt a renewed sense of peace, knowing that the storm had passed and they were finally free to enjoy the brightness of a new beginning. The bond between mother and daughter had only grown stronger, and their lives would forever be guided by the resilience they had discovered within each other. And so, under the warmth of the morning sun, they looked forward to the future, confident that they could face anything, together.